So hi everyone, my name is Larry Sun. I'm a Googler here, and today I'm very pleased to bring Casey to Google. So this is Casey Wilson. So Casey started a microfinance organization in China in 2007. In the past year and a half, she has been working very hard in leading this organization to raising funds to help the poorest in China. And there are 300 million people who are living under the poverty line in China. And today, Casey is going to talk about some of the progress the organization has made and also some of the challenges in navigating the heavily regulated environment of China. So let's give her a round of warm applause so that she can tell us her stories.
First of all, thank you guys so much for showing up. I know you guys have wonderful lunch options and restaurants and whatnot to go to, and thanks a lot for coming. Just to get a sense of who you guys are, how many of you have been to China? Wow, that's pretty good. And then how many of you are programmers or programmers? What do the rest of you do? What are you guys involved in? Finance? And you guys? Finance. Translation. And then how many of you know what microfinance is? Okay, so we have a pretty microfinance, China-savvy crowd. Okay, so today I'm going to tell you guys the story of Wokai, the microfinance nonprofit that we've started, how we came to be, why we're involved in China, and why we think you should be involved as well. Our model, where we are today, and where we plan to go in the future, hopefully with your help. So first of all, what is Wokai? Wokai is a consumer philanthropy platform for China. That means that you can go onto wokai.org, take $10 today, give it to someone in rural China tomorrow to start a small business, track their progress and repayments over time. And once they've repaid their loan completely, you can take that contribution that you gave last year and contribute it to a new borrower to support their business. So how did this all start? We started about 2 years ago on St. Patrick's Day. My co-founder, Courtney, in this photo right here, had been doing microfinance in China for about 3 years. And I'd moved to China to pursue a career in development. After studying together at a program in Tsinghua University, right next to Google in China, we moved into an apartment together and decided to combine our skills and interests in development and microfinance to start Wokai. Then there were 4 major steps from there that kind of helped us reach the point where we are today. It took us about 4 months to really realize the needs of the microfinance sector in China, do due diligence trips to see what microfinance was like on the ground there, and write our business plan. And then in the summer of 2007, we returned to the US and put together some seed funding from family and friends to get the organization started. By the fall of 2007, I returned to China and we began recruiting our field partners. So our model works where we're online and we select institutions, so local NGOs in China, who select the borrowers and post the profiles online. And so in August, we began doing our first evaluation. We've evaluated 4 institutions in Inner Mongolia Province, Hebei Province, Sichuan Province, and Ningxia, and approved 2 partners, one in Inner Mongolia, and we're going to be launching with our second partner in the next few days in Sichuan, right where the earthquake was last May. The second component was recruiting volunteers. Up until 3 months ago, we only had 1 full-time paid staff, and the rest was volunteer-based. We've had about 50 interns, ranging from high school students to college students at Penn and Harvard and Columbia, to professional volunteers, such as Larry Sun over here, who's our Director of Technology. The next component was building chapters. So no matter how good of a product we build online, we need a community of contributors to actually access our website. And so the major question we had when we were developing Wokai was, how do we actually build a community of contributors online? And we realized that we really had to go offline to get that community. Unlike Expedia or Amazon, people don't wake up in the morning thinking, how am I going to use this $10 in my pocket to contribute to someone? And so our answer to that question was building chapters. These chapters are made up of professional volunteers. Many of them work in finance or law or are getting PhDs or are working in web development. And our chapters are in San Francisco, Seattle, and New York City. And they work on everything from giving speeches to holding events to working with local media and doing online marketing. Our fourth component was building the website, of course. For us, we really realized with this that 3 times is a charm. It took us 2 failures to reach the point where we are today. We first of all went with some developers who were from very large firms but didn't have experience taking things from start to scratch. They made it through our 5-page HTML site and took about 6 times the amount of time it would take me today to develop it. And we realized that they weren't ready for that next step of actually building our real site. Then it took us about 6 months to find our next development team. We either found developers who were very much experienced, but were quoting us between $50,000 and $200,000 for the site, or developers who were in our price range, but didn't have the skills to actually make the site happen. We ended up going with a development team in New York City who delivered a site to us that was a disaster. And luckily, actually through Kai-Fu Lee, the head of Google China, we found our current developers today. And they swept in and really were our saviors. They've been working at about 10% their going rate. And it took them about 22 months worth of developer hours to build the site that we have today. So, I mean, the question I get all the time when I speak about Wokai is, why China? Why, with a country that's one of the quickest developing countries in the world, its GDP is going to surpass the size of the United States in the next 30 years. Why should we support China? Why shouldn't China just solve its own problems? And instead we could help food aid in Zimbabwe or support a micro-entrepreneur in India. There's still some huge issues facing China that I really don't think will be solved by natural course of economic development. Right now, you have about 300 million people in China living on less than $1 a day. So that's equivalent to the entire US population. On top of that, you have this growing rural-urban divide. So in China, about 737 million people live in rural areas. That's equivalent to 2.4 United States put together. Let's take a look at rural life. This borrower in the middle, or this guy in the middle with the black sweater is, Huang Dongjun. He is a 35-year-old man living in Sichuan province. He spent about 10 years working in urban areas, working in the city as a migrant worker in a factory. And while he was in the cities earning about $100 a month, he worked right next to a chicken raising farm. And so when he was there, he kind of learned how people raise chickens, and then he decided to take that back to his family in Sichuan province and start a small chicken company. So now he's taking out a $400 loan to start a chicken raising farm. I think right now he has about 900 chickens, and he uses the income from his microenterprise to support his daughter, his wife, and his 2 parents. That's the kitchen that his family has, and they live in a three-room mud hut without any electricity. Let's compare that to urban China. For those of you who've visited China, I'm sure you've been to Shanghai and Beijing, and here's the Beijing skyline. Here's the Apple store that opened about 5 blocks down the street from my house at this new Sanlitun Village Mall. It's a far cry from the hills of rural Sichuan. So kind of to get an idea of the current divide in rural China, it's important to kind of look back 30 years into the past to when China began opening up to capitalism, and really to be able to use that to get a sense of where China's going in the future. So back in 1979, everyone was basically equal. So that girl at the Apple store was basically in the same situation as a woman in rural Sichuan. everyone was earning less than $1 a day. And basically, urban and rural areas were in the same position. If we look at today, people in urban areas are earning 3.5 times the amount of people in rural areas. The average urban income is about $1,900 a year, while the average rural income is about $1.50 a day. Right now, urban income is growing at about 9.6% a year, so almost 10%, while rural income is around 6% a year. So you have this situation where if you take these income inequalities and these different levels of income growth, by 2027, so about 20 years from now, someone in rural China will be earning $1,900 a year, so about $5 a day, while someone in urban China is earning about $12,000 a year. So you have people in urban China earning about 6.3 times the amount as people in rural China. And as most of you know, people in China are savers. So if we imagine not just annual incomes, but what that means kind of in the long term, if each of these people are saving about 40% of their income, in 10 years, that girl in the Apple store will have about $48,000 saved up. Well, that person in rural China has $8,000. And there's really no way of bridging that gap. This is just an observation. These aren't stats. But one thing that's been really interesting for me living in China is to see the vast size of the population, what that actually means in terms of growth. So in China, you have about the same amount of land as we have in the United States, but you have 4 times as many people living on that land. And that's not to mention the fact that we have more arid land in the United States than we have in China. So you have 4 times as many people living on just the same amount of size of land and less resources. And there's no way in that situation that unless you start kind of really implementing innovative solutions to development, that those people that are kind of being left out of the economic growth are going to be helped. So when we were kind of looking at how do we address these issues facing China, we thought the only way that we're going to be able to start affecting growth and helping those people that are kind of left out in the midst of economic development is to develop rural economies. Right now, if you live in rural China, you probably have about 3 options of things to do. You're either living on the land that you've inherited and doing animal husbandry, so raising animals or agriculture, or you're doing day labor, either in a local town or moving to a city and being a migrant worker. There really aren't many other job opportunities, and people don't have assets to start small businesses that'll then turn into larger businesses and then turn into local economies. So on top of that, 600 million people in China do not have access to credit to start small businesses. So when we were starting Wokai, we thought, how about we work in the microfinance sector to begin providing people with opportunities to start small businesses and begin building those rural economies. So first of all, what is microfinance? Microfinance provides financial services to the poor. Microcredit are loans to the poor to start small businesses. Loans tend to be about 1 year long, have 15 to 20% interest rates in China, and that's due to, instead of the borrowers coming to banks, the microfinance institutions are going to them in their villages. They will go to the villages to screen borrowers. Every 2 weeks, they'll go to the villages for repayments and also provide them with training and support services. And they use the group guarantee system. So since the poor don't have assets to guarantee their loans, they've created the idea of a group guarantee system where 5 people will get together. Each of them will guarantee the loans of each other. And if one person doesn't repay, the other 4 have to step in to repay that borrower's loan. If no one steps in to repay that borrower's loan, then no one will have access to capital in the future. In China, microfinance has achieved success. The institutions that are out there have achieved over 95% on-time repayment rates. But the issue is that they have limited access to funding. Due to current regulations, microfinance institutions have to rely on donor funding for expansion. And as people see China less and less as a cause, donor funding is quickly leaving the microfinance sector. Microfinance is basically in its nascent stages in China compared to other developed countries, such as if we compare China with Bangladesh, the entire population of Bangladesh is about 160 million people. The Grameen Bank, which is the third largest microfinance provider in Bangladesh, has a loan portfolio of $530 million. In all of China, the entire microfinance sector combined only has a loan portfolio of $200 million. So, kind of in the relative spectrum, microfinance in China is basically non-existent. So when we were creating Wokai, we thought, why not create a new funding source for these microfinance institutions to expand to more borrowers and begin increasing their impact? Here are some photos from a trip that we made when we were developing the business plan for Wokai, and a few borrowers at this institution in Ningxia. These are the books that they use to record their repayments. So far cry from Citibank down the street. Okay, so what is the Wokai model? There are basically three components to our website. The first component is the contribute section, where you can go on, you can browse borrowers, you can contribute, say, $10 to support their loan. After you contributed, you get updates on your borrower's progress, and you can reinvest your funds. The back end of that is our field partners in rural China screen the borrowers, post their profiles online. We translate those into English from Chinese. And once we've fundraised for the borrower, we'll pass those funds over to our microfinance partner, field partner in rural China. We have three main components that we do to be able to get a field partner online. The first is due diligence. Before we work with any partner, we'll do a 5-day trip down to that institution to really evaluate them and make sure that they're ready to work with Wokai. In those evaluations, we'll do a 5-day evaluation, first meeting with the board of directors, then going down to the management staff, meeting loan officers, and doing audit of their clients. Once we return, we'll put together a proposal for our investment committee, made up of international microfinance authorities. The investment committee will then make a decision on A, do we partner with the institution? And B, if we partner with them, what's our loan funding kind of projections for the first year? Do they have to meet any benchmarks, such as adopting international best practice accounting systems or putting together an independent board of directors? Once a partner is approved and we've come up with our contract and funding plan, Zhang Sheng, our director of field partnerships, will go down and train them on our systems, both the online systems of our back-end banking systems and how to use the website, as well as how to create convincing profiles of their borrowers to post online. The next component of our website is the community section. So in order to drive our cause and increase the traffic on our website and really increase the user experience, we've created a community where everyone from contributors to microfinance organizations in China to borrowers and groups can connect in an online forum. Finally, we have a news section. We realized it was really important in order to drive more traffic to our site, get more people involved in microfinance in China and social innovation in China, to build a comprehensive information resource. Right now, if you try to search microfinance in China, you basically find very, very little information, maybe 6 or 7 quality articles. And we thought that the first step towards pushing development would be pushing knowledge and information. So how is Wokai different? Right now, we're kind of existing in a space on our own. One aspect that makes us different is the fact that we're transparent. You can go online from anywhere around the world and contribute to a borrower, knowing that 100% of your contribution will go towards funding their loan. It would be the same if you were sitting right here as if you were sitting at their headquarters in Inner Mongolia. Second of all, we're young. I had an interesting conversation last week with one of our family friends who is, say, around 55 years old, and she was saying that her generation would give money to, say, the Red Cross, and they would just trust that the Red Cross would use it well, as opposed to our generation, where we're happy to support social causes and we want to, but we need to know exactly where each dollar is going, and we want to see the impact of that change. Third of all, Wokai can work with any contributor. We can have 60 contributors, starving students, each giving $10 to support one borrower's loan, or one person can give $600 to support that same borrower. Finally, we're scalable. When we kind of project into the long term, it basically costs us the same amount to fund one borrower at a field partner as it costs us to fund 10,000. It costs us about $1,200 to do all of the monitoring and the training for a year for each partner. And then after that, our platform allows us to scale at no marginal cost to new borrowers. So all in all, Wokai today has offices in Oakland, which is a donated office that I work out of part-time, and then our main office in Beijing. We have 4 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff, our technology director, Larry, and our creative director. We have 4 developers working part-time, 2 field partners in Inner Mongolia, in Sichuan province, and 3 chapters in San Francisco, Seattle, and New York City, with 75 professional volunteers. So far, we've supported 144 contributors have supported 24 borrowers to start small businesses. And we've done all of this on a budget of around $120,000 a year. So kind of along the process of starting Wokai, we realized, a few months ago that not only had we created a microfinance platform, but we'd also created a pipeline for people connecting back to China. And that's not necessarily limited to microfinance. So kind of what does that mean for us in the future? That means that if we expanded to healthcare, you could fund a barefoot doctor, a barefoot monk in the Tibetan plateau to provide healthcare and health services to other people in Tibetan communities. You could fund vaccines for those students over there. Or in education, you could support a child to go to school for a semester of high school or buy them a ruler. But in order to get there, we need your support. Like I said before, we're almost 90 to 95% reliant on volunteer support. And there are 3 ways that you can help. First of all, spreading the word. We're 100% reliant on viral marketing to get the word out about Wokai. So by telling your family and friends, you're doing a lot to help grow the organization. Second of all, you can contribute. By logging on to wokai.org, today you can go and support a borrower in Inner Mongolia to start a small business. And finally, you can volunteer and join our team. Right now, we have a chapter in San Francisco, and we've also started a chapter in the South Bay. And we're always looking for people to help out with areas such as web development, finance, public relations, and online marketing. Thank you guys very much. Does anyone have any questions?
So I've heard, I don't want to say a lot about, there's a fair amount of low-level corruption in parts of China.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about necessarily your partners. How do you keep from being led dry?
So would you mean on the borrower level or on the kind of the partner level?
Neither. Around there, public officials, that sort of thing, they just ever get involved?
Basically, at this point, if you want to do microfinance in China, you have to have a lot of government support. There are very, very stringent financial sector regulations, and so they offer licenses for microfinance institutions, but in order to get those licenses, you need government veto and you need government backing. And so that puts them in the situation where they're always working with the government as opposed to kind of in conflict with them. We haven't had to deal with much kind of corruption or government-like kickbacks or anything like that. And I think the main reason for that is that China's putting a really big emphasis right now on developing rural economies. They realize that if they don't do that, they're going to have a lot of social unrest going kind of into the future. I think the biggest area we have to deal with corruption is we're dealing with, so in microfinance, there are kind of 4 tiers of institutions. There's the top tier that, say like the Grameen Bank, where you have somewhere between 100,000 and a few million borrowers. They have very strong risk control, very strong accounting systems, and kind of going down the tiers, you get to, at the fourth tier, the institutions that have maybe between 1 and 5,000 borrowers. They don't have very robust accounting system, risk control systems, and there's really no way to, or there's definitely a way, but it's very difficult to monitor those institutions. And given kind of the nascent stages of the microfinance sector in China, we're dealing with those institutions where there is the possibility of corruption because they don't have those kind of risk controls in place. And so for us, in avoiding corruption, the biggest deal is, getting them up on international accounting systems, doing monitoring. Every 3 to 4 months, we'll actually do an on-site monitoring trip. We have special bank accounts that have Wokai funds, and then we have banking systems in the back of the website where they record every borrower distribution, borrower repayment, and so we can kind of match up those accounts.
Your partners, would you
Yeah, exactly. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. So his question was the sources of funding for our field partners. The majority of them were started back 10 to 14 years ago with funding from the UN Development Program. The UN Development Program decided that they wanted to kind of spark microfinance in China. And so they went to local governments of counties where the majority of people were living under the poverty line and kind of asked the governments if they would sponsor someone to start a microfinance institution. And so they gave them the technical support and training to start up the institution along with seed funding. And many of these institutions since then have gotten a little bit of support, say from the Grameen Foundation or various grants, but they're at the position where the majority of them aren't getting any new funding. They're able to pay their operating costs based off of that interest rate, but their loan portfolio is basically static. Yeah. So her question was the idea of our model is contribution-based versus like Kiva's model, which is loan-based. For us, that decision was purely based off of the regulatory sector in China. It's impossible for us since we're not a financial institution, we're not able to lend to our field partners. And since they're NGOs, they're not able to access commercial loans. And so even if we were a bank, we wouldn't be able to lend to them. As opposed to like Kiva, where the majority of the countries that they work with, the regulatory sectors are much more open, and so they're able to lend to their partners. So that was kind of the first component. And then when you look at Kiva, around 90% of people never take their money out of the system. Most people consider it kind of a donation. And so we thought that making it tax deductible, making it a donation that will always be used for loan capital in the future, allowing you to reinvest your funds, would have that same kind of impact. How do we measure the success? Well, I mean, at this point, we launched our website 2 months ago. And so we are just kind of in the nascent stages of building. But I mean, I would say that we would measure our success by the amount of borrowers that we can support, the number of field partners we're working with, the number of contributors we get online. Those would be like the major kind of matrices. Yeah, his question was ways of evaluating the impact of our field partners on the borrowers. I would say that kind of in the long term, we'd really like to implement some like social impact studies where, the field partners are, in creating the borrower profiles, have to log in all of this information about the borrowers. So if we could add on some additional kind of data points that could measure borrower impact over time, that would be a really good way that we're hoping to eventually kind of measure their social impact. Because that's important. I mean, even in evaluating our partners, one issue I find is usually the institutions that seem like they're safer bets to work with are ones where they're in a kind of an easier situation. Their borrowers aren't quite as poor. They're closer to cities. And so you have the whole idea of some institutions that don't seem as strong, but they're really helping the poor versus other institutions that seem really robust, but that's not the person that you necessarily want to donate $10 to support their loan. And so I think taking into account kind of the social impact of the organization is really important.
As I think about it, it feels like there's still a pretty big gap, technology-wise, to be able to have a partner that's close enough to the borrowers, but still they need internet access, right?
So his question was the technology gap. What's so interesting in China is you can be anywhere in China and get cell phone reception. You can be hiking and trekking on the Tibetan Plateau and get cell phone reception, which is crazy because when I'm here in Oakland, I don't get reception at my home. And kind of the same with the internet. Rural China is very different than rural US in that you'll be in a very rural area and there's always what they call a town, which will have somewhere between 10 and 40,000 people. And those towns will always be hooked up to the internet. They have internet bars and cafes. For example, our partner in rural Sichuan, each one of their branches has internet access, which is very important for them because then they can record all of the repayments, distributions, and whatnot, and be able to track all of that stuff. As opposed to, say, India, where, just electricity is shoddy, not to mention internet access, and those kind of issues are a lot more complicated. So your question is how they chose the 15 to 20% interest rate? It's basically they're trying to reach operational self-sufficiency, which would basically mean that they're able to cover their costs. And hopefully they would charge an interest rate where they're able to cover the cost of depreciation and kind of compensate for inflation. And that interest rate that they have is actually really low compared to the international benchmarks for a sustainable level of interest rates, which is around 30 to 40%. And I see you cringing, but I mean, when you think about, say, our field partner in Inner Mongolia, they have a branch where some of the borrowers live 100 kilometers away from their branch. And so, before they even get a client online, they have to first do kind of a promotional thing for people to realize what microfinance is. And then if borrowers come and decide to apply for loans, the loan officer will first go and do a thorough evaluation of the borrower, interviewing them, but also interviewing the stakeholders in the community, their friends and their family, to kind of cross-check the information. Then you'll have a director from the branch go in and visit the borrower. And then once the loan is distributed, every 2 weeks they'll have to travel 100 kilometers to collect those loans and provide training and support. And so when you think that maybe that village has 20 borrowers, each taking out $300 loans, the cost of, say 20 100-kilometer round trips just gets incredibly high. Yeah, so our first requirements for field partners is that they have to have at least 95% on-time repayment rates. They have to have transparent management systems and both the desire and kind of the capacity to scale. Because one thing we've discovered, and I'm sure everyone in venture capital or whatnot has discovered this as well, is it's really the leaders of the institution that will drive whether they kind of stay small and really stay in the position where they are, or work hard enough to kind of get that capital to expand to more borrowers. So first of all, we look at their leaders. And then if they pass those basic requirements, we'll go down and do a visit. Usually the institutions have between 2,000 and 3,500 borrowers. They have a staff of about between maybe 20 and 30 people. The majority of them, maybe they'll have like a director, a vice director, someone who does, if they have IT systems, the management information systems, they'll have a cashier and accountant, and then they'll have branches and have a director and then loan officers. So the majority of the staff is loan officers who are just interfacing with clients and collecting repayments. Any more questions? Thank you guys so much for coming and listening to my speech. And if any of you are interested in getting involved with Wokai, please come and chat with me afterwards. We would love your support.